Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. And today I thought of a fun idea for a video, a controversial idea but a fun one nevertheless, and that is to predict the top 10 pound for pound 5 years from now. Now a lot of shit could happen or not happen in 5 years, so this list has a colossal chance of being completely wrong, but you know what, I'm totally fine with that. That's what makes this video fun, that's what makes it controversial, and honestly I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I just want to get my idea out there and I want to hear what you guys have to say. That's the whole point of the video, to get a conversation going. But having said that, I do acknowledge that I may be a little too optimistic with the fights that I predict to have happened 5 years from now. I didn't go into details of, you know, the different promoters making or not making fights happen, but I did consider it a little bit. I more so went into what I believe will happen in 5 years, or I guess hoping to have happened in 5 years. It may not be the most realistic fights, but I truly do think that these fights that I will mention has a good chance at happening by 2029. There's also a chance of, you know, retirements happening, injuries, etc. I don't know, anything, you know, anything can happen in 5 years. But having said that, I want to start off by mentioning 4 major names in today's boxing world that will most definitely not be on the list due to retirement. These boxers are, of course, Terence Crawford, Canelo Alvarez, Beterbiev, and Usyk. These guys are key names in today's boxing landscape, but you know, unfortunately, I think 2025 is the last year all 4 of these names will be active at the same time. You know, none of them will be active in 2029. Oh, and one more thing, I will format this video the same way I've done my other ranking videos. That means I will use a tier in this list as well, just so you guys know who I think is on whose level. Like, for example, there's only 1 spot difference between number 5 and number 6, right? But I might happen to think that number 6 might not be on the same level as number 5. That might sound a little bit confusing now, but you guys will understand once I get it started. Also, and I think this is the last one for sure, there is going to be a lot of spoilers on my future prediction videos, but you know what, there's no getting around that. I didn't do a big study on this, like, you know, on who I think would win these potential fights. It's just more so off the dome thinking on who I would favor if these 2 fighters fought, and that's how I compiled this list. But anyways, that concludes all my disclaimers. Let's get it started by talking about the lowest tier, and that is tier number 5, where I have 2 names battling it out for the 10th and final spot. These 2 guys are Vergil Ortiz and Jaronennis. Now this one is a tricky one because I feel as though Vergil has a head start at getting to the big names first. He's already fighting at 154 and there's already buzz with him fighting Tim Tszyu. I personally believe that he would beat Tim Tszyu, and in 5 years time he would have beaten at least 2 or 3 of these junior middleweights. These junior middleweights being Mendoza, Fundora, Lubin, and Ramos. I didn't mention Charlo because I think if Jermell hasn't retired yet, at this point his next and final fight would be against Tim Tszyu, and then he'll hang it up. I also predict that Ortiz will be fighting at 160 by 2029, maybe even at 168. You know, he'd have at least one of these middleweights in his resume, them being Janet Beck, Carlos Adames, or Chris Eubank Jr. That would make him a 2-weight division world champion, you know, at 154 and 160 by 2029. As for Boots, well, he's already a champ at 147, and he might look to be undisputed there once Terence Crawford retires. I don't think he'll ever fight Terence Crawford though, but by 2029 he'd have cleared 147 for sure. He'd also beat those names that Ortiz beat in junior middleweight, and he may be fighting at 160 at this point, but I'm not so sure about that, just because Boots strikes me as a guy who wants to show complete dominance. So I do see him trying to go undisputed in each weight class he's in, those weight classes being welterweight and junior middleweight. So he might still be clearing out 154 by 2029. So that means both Ortiz and Boots would at least be 2 division world champs and unified champs at that. I feel Boots has a higher potential of being undisputed, but and this will piss a lot of people off, but I do favor Ortiz over Boots if they fought each other. I think there's a decent chance that these two would have fought each other already by 2029. So, it's tricky for me. But I don't know. I guess even if I do favor Ortiz, I don't favor him by that much. So I guess with that being said, I'd have to put Boots at number 10. He just edges out Vergil Ortiz for the 10th spot. Okay, moving on to tier 4, where I have spots number 8 and 9 open. And the two people competing for spot number 8 are Davidbenavidez and Teofimolopez. I'm going to start off with Davidbenavidez's case for number 8 and how I think his career will go in 5 years. Now, I do doubt that he will ever fight Canelo because he just announced that he will fight Gvozdyk, or he's planning on fighting Gvozdyk at light heavyweight this year. So since that Canelo fight isn't announced yet, I'm left to believe that his next fight is going to be Gvozdyk. I do think he'll beat him, and I do think he'll be the next king at light heavyweight after Beterbiev. I think by 2029, he'd have cleared out the light heavyweight division, and that includes, of course, Dimitri Bivol. He will beat Bivol, in my opinion, and he would have beat the likes of Anthony Yarde as well, Callum Smith, Buatsi, even, this prospect named Ben Whitaker, who I love, by the way. I'm a huge fan of that guy, but I think he'd lose to the Mexican monster. You guys might be thinking, why is he so low then if he's beaten Bivol and all these other guys and he's a 2-division world champion, all that? Well, it's because I happen to think that after, spoilers by the way, Beterbiev beats Bivol, Benavidez will fight Beterbiev and he will lose to Beterbiev. This fight will happen in 2025 and Beterbiev will retire after that. He would then fight and beat Bivol and reign as king of the division until Davidmorrelljr moves up and beats and dethrones him. Yes, I think Benavidez beats Bivol but loses to Beterbiev and Davidmorrelljr. He will only lose to the best. Okay, now Teo at this point, I believe he'd have beaten the likes of Subriel Matias, Ryan Garcia, Arnold Barbosa, maybe even Gary Anton Russell, since Teo is the man and he fights the boogeyman of the division he's in. I think Teo would also be fighting at 147 at this point. I think he fights whoever is the top guy at 147, aside from Boots. He beats them. I think Teo unifies at 147, but prior to that, I think he fights and loses to Devinhaney at 140. I think Teo gets beat by Devinhaney and moves up to 147. His very next fight. But by the time he's at 147, I think Boots would have already gone up to 154, so they don't fight. But Teo fights the best guy at 147 and dominates. This makes him a 3-division world champion, beating the guy in every single division except for Boots, I guess. So do I give the 8th spot to Benavidez or Teo? Honestly, for me, I would have to give it to Benavidez just because, in my opinion, he will dominate everyone but Beterbiev and Morrell and Bivol. Whereas Teo would lose to Haney, and he has shown to be consistently inconsistent. He has this terrible habit of underperforming and disappointing at times. So for me, Benavidez is number 8 on the list and Teo is number 9. Now moving on to tier number 3. And in this tier, 3 people are actually battling out for number 5. I got Devinhaney, Juntonakatani, and Shakurstevenson in this tier. I'm going to start off by talking about Devinhaney first. So if you haven't watched my prediction video yet, I do have Haney beating Ryan Garcia. So he definitely has him in his resume. And I just said he'd beat Teo, so he would also have him in his resume. So that's a pretty tough resume so far. I also see Haney moving up to 147, collecting a belt there. Maybe even cherry picking a champion at 154. So he would be a 3-division world champion, maybe even a 4-division world champion if he wins a belt at 154. But en route to 147 or 154, I do see him losing to Gervontadavis. Yes, I do see this fight happening before 2029. I think there's too much money to be made for this fight not to happen, especially if it happens after Haney beats Teo. Haney beating Teo would make him a bona fide superstar, and with him being a superstar, I think Tank would definitely fight him then. Now I'm going to talk about Junto. I do think by 2029, Junto would be fighting as a featherweight world champion. He just beat Santiago the other day, where he became a 3-division world champion. I think he wins a belt at 122, and I think he wins another one at 126. And I do think he unifies at bantamweight and in 122. His resume would have at least three of these names, okay? These names are Takuma Inoue, Jason Maloney, Emmanuel Rodriguez, Sam Goodman, Murodjon Akhmadaliev, Tapales, Robeisy Ramirez, and maybe even someone like Stephen Fulton. He would be a 5-division world champion at this point, and I think he'd be undefeated. I think he'd be a unified champion in most of those divisions as well. Oh, and the super fight between him and Inoue is brewing. I think people would be calling for that fight at this point, especially since he'd have beaten Takuma Inoue. Last guy on this tier is, of course, Shakurstevenson. And guys, it's unfortunate, but I honestly do think that by 2029, Shakur still won't have the super fights that he hopes to have. I don't think Tank would have fought him by 2029. And, honestly, maybe Haney, but I don't think Haney stays at 140 after Tank beats him. So the time is just a little bit off. But if they do fight, I favor Shakur. But anyways, I think by 2029, Shakur's biggest name in his resume would be Vasily Lomachenko. I think in his upcoming fight, Loma beats Kambosos, and he beats another guy to unify. And then he'll fight Shakur down the line, where Shakur will get him and Loma will retire. I think it would be a great fight, but I do think Shakur retires Loma and maybe even becomes undisputed at 135. But he only becomes undisputed if Tank relinquishes his belt or goes up to 140. Aside from Loma, I think Shakur beats a lot of really good underrated fighters at 135, like Frank Martin, Floyd Schofield, William Zepeda, Raymond Murataya, Andy Cruz, and then he go up to 140 and beat more underrated names like Richardson Hitchens, Dalton Smith, even Matias. That would make him a 4-division world champion and maybe undisputed at lightweight. And of course, he's undefeated. Who gets the 5th spot out of these 3? And guys, I'm being dead honest when I tell you guys that this is a tough call for me. So if you guys could comment down below and who you'd give it to, that would be amazing. But for me, I ended up giving it to Shakurstevenson. And I'm not very confident in that, but to me, I believe that he'd beat Loma the most convincingly. Yes, he would beat the oldest version of Loma, but still. He also has a shot at becoming undisputed, and if he does do that, he will do it even better than Devin did. And I think his resume would just be full of killers. Lesser known killers, but killers nonetheless. So Shakur is number 5, and number 6 is Devinhaney. I like Devin at 6 instead of Junto because he still has the bigger and better names in his resume. The TO win holds a lot of weight, you know what I mean? Plus, he'd be cherry picking no names at 147 and 154, making his resume a little bit better than Junto's in my opinion. Obviously, that leaves Junto at number 7. Very, very, very impressive resume, but he wouldn't have that career-defining win yet against a pound-for-pound talent. On to tier number 2, and I got 3 people here fighting for the number 2 spot. I got Tank, Jesse Bamrodriguez, and none other than Davidmorrelljr Jr. Now I'm gonna speak on Bam first. And by 2029, I see Bam beating more aging legends, Estrada being the next one. I see him unifying and even becoming undisputed champ at either 115 or 118. I also see Bam fighting out 122 by 2029 and being a champ there as well, making him a 4-division world champ and undisputed in one of those divisions. Aside from the names he already has in his resume today, he would also have Estrada, Kazuto Ioka, Kosei Tanaka, and one or even both Maloney's. I think his resume would be completely stacked. I want to talk about Tank next. Now Tank by 2029 would have beaten, like I said earlier, he would have beaten Devinhaney at this point. He would have taken Haney's O when some would have Devin top 3 pound for pound. It would be after Haney beats Tio, so this fight would be a huge mega fight, making Tank the winner of 2 huge mega fights, and he would make it look easier than what people would expect in my opinion. I think Tank handlers would carefully pick Tank's opponent, so he would also have William Zepeda in his resume and Matias. In my opinion, those 2 have styles that favor him, so I think his handlers would handpick those 2 for him. I also see Tank being like the undefeated gatekeeper at 135 and 140, which sounds hella weird. But I see it like he'd kick weight climbers back down to their previous divisions. I feel as though he would hold down 135 and 140 without fighting Shakur, which honestly is a shame. I think he'd fight and beat weight climbers like Brandon Figueroa, Rafael Espinoza, Oshaki Foster, Navarrete, Cordina, Oscar Valdez, these type of people who are daring to be great. I think he'd dominate all of them and he'd maintain his 90% knockout ratio. I think Haney would be his biggest win of his career, and he'd live off of that and then dominate other B-level opposition. Now, the final guy in this tier is Davidmorrelljr Jr. And I feel like a lot of people would be pissed that I have Morrell so high. But hey, man, I think very highly of him. What can I say? I think that by 2029, Morrell is undisputed at 168. I don't think Canelo fights him, but I think he unifies all the belts at 168, and he absolutely runs through everybody in the division. I'm talking about after Canelo retires. I think he'd have the scalps of Caleb Plant, Diego Pacheco, Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, Christian Mbili, Jermall Charlo. He would absolutely blast them out after outclassing them in their fights. The fights wouldn't even be competitive. Like a completely different type of dominance. Then after becoming undisputed, I see him going up to 175 and going after a top 3 in the division, that being Dimitri Bivol. This is Bivol after getting knocked out by Beterbiev and losing a close but clear decision to Benavidez. I think Morrell fights and dominates Bivol, outboxes him and knocks him out. And then after that, he'd have super fight with Benavidez when Benavidez had been king of 175 for a few years, when Benavidez was considered top 5 pound for pound by everybody, when he's been running through everyone. That version of Benavidez will fight Morrell in a huge mega fight, and Morrell will outclass him as well and knock him out in the later rounds. That is how I see Davidmorrellj's career going. Who gets the number 2 spot? Well, for me, honestly, surprisingly, this was an easy pick. It's Davidmorrelljr Jr., guys. I was even considering putting Morrell in a tier of his own, if I'm being honest. Morrell gets number 2 and Tank is number 3. The difference is that Morrell would be in the middle of his prime by 2029. He would be 31 and Tank would be 34. Morrell would also be seeking for any sort of challenge. I think he'd also be dominating his opponents better than Tank would. His resume would just be better as well as his performance. I think he'd also be more active. Plus, he would be undisputed at 168 and is looking to be undisputed at 175 after he fights and beats Benavidez. So that leaves Tank at 3 and Bam at number 4. But on to the final tier. Tier number 1, where there's only one name, and of course, that's none other than Naoyainoue at the number 1 pound for pound spot. The pound for pound king. Alright guys, listen. I know there's a ton of Inoue haters out there, but for me, by 2029, I see Inoue completely cleaning out 122. He would then move up to 126, where there is a ton of killers right now. He would move up there and he would collect all the belts. Slower than he did in 122. It would take longer this time around. He's going to collect all those belts and beat every single killer at 126 and become a 3-division undisputed champion. Something that's never been done before. A historic and record-setting feat. And he'd have fought some killers on the way there. He'd be pushed to the brink and he'd spend roughly 3 years at least at 126 to properly fill out. After becoming undisputed there, he would dare to be even greater and go up to 130 and win a belt there. I don't think he'd stay at 130 because he's just too small, in my opinion. I think he has a hellish fight against a champion there. He's gonna win, of course, but he's gonna move back down to 126 or he's gonna retire. That would make him a 6th division world champion, undisputed in 3 and undefeated. He would also win Ring Magazine's Fighter of the Decade award. Naoyainoue is without a doubt the pound for pound king by 2029. Now I want to address some names that y'all will undoubtedly leave in the comments. And the first guy I want to talk about is, of course, Keyshawn Davis. Now, I don't know how many of you guys know this, but Keyshawn is actually my favorite fighter right now. But because of the dog that he is, I think he's going to fight a lot of these killers and fall short once or twice by 2029. And there's no shame in that. He'd be regarded highly by true boxing fans, but the top 10 fighters that I named just now would have accomplished more than him by 2029. And that's okay. That's my opinion. Andy Cruz, sort of the same with Keyshawn. I don't think he'd fight as many dogs as Keyshawn would, but I think Andy Cruz loses once or twice as well by 2029 because the lightweight division is just so stacked. I think he fights Shakur and falls short, and Keyshawn as well. Now, the Keyshawn one is a 50-50 fight. I don't know who's going to win that. The next couple people are Abdullah Mason, Bruce Carrington, and Xander Zayas. I just don't think it's their time yet. The next group of people, Jared Anderson, Hrgovic, Jola Love, Jai Apataya. Now, Jai has a shot, but I see him fighting at heavyweight by 2029. And I feel as though the heavyweight division just won't have a face. I think it'll have a lot of talent, which will mean that nobody will truly dominate, in my opinion. So I don't think they can crack the top 10, respectfully. And then there's this guy that is underrated or unknown to us Westerners. His name is Kenshiro Teraji, and a lot of people are saying he's even top 10 today, like right now. Honestly, guys, I'm just not educated enough on the lowest weight classes, and that's on me. I'm still trying to get my bag up when it comes to that, so I can't comment on him as much as I want at this point in time. But that is it. That is all. This was a long one, guys, but honestly, I had so much fun thinking up of these scenarios and what ifs, and I really do hope that we get the super fights that I mentioned in this video. Just imagine how great boxing would be. And guys, like I said, I am expecting to be called a casual or a dick rider or a hater, any and everything above, but just remember, I made this video to get a conversation going. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear why y'all don't agree with me, or you know, if there are any of you guys out there, I want to hear why you do agree with me. So please comment down below. Let's be controversial. Let's have some fun. Let's have a good debate down there, y'all. But that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.